Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. My name's Dane Groeneveld, CEO of HUDDL3 Group, and today I have joining us from London, Laura Hunter. So Laura is the founder of the Now Work, and we've just been having a great conversation about sustainability and particularly how teams in the future are going to organize to deliver massive scale transformation. So this is going to be a fun conversation. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So your space intrigues me. As I was sharing before, my brother works in sustainability. I've spent a lot of my career working in oil and gas, and my father was in mining. So I've kind of seen a lot of the larger industries and the way that they've driven change and driven impact in our world. And what you're now doing is really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into this space and where you're starting to see the opportunities to build this massive scale transformation through communities?
Good question. So how did I get into this space? I think it's a great question, and I think my path wasn't necessarily straightforward. So I don't have a kind of environmental science degree. I actually studied English literature and history, so I come from the kind of humanities space. But I had always, since graduating, knew that I wanted to kind of put my career in service of something that was much bigger than myself, and was very lucky to kind of land my first role in the non-profit sector, actually. Mm-hmm. And then essentially transitioned over to working in sustainability consultancy. So there I was, that's where I spent kind of most of my career. So working with huge industries, kind of from fashion to food and tech, the creative industries. So kind of spanning lots of different sectors, I guess. Thinking about how can these industries use their enormous power and influence for good, and as you say, to accelerate these massive scale transformations that we need. Not necessarily kind of, not the normal route in, I guess, through kind of humanities and then into sustainability, but this is where I am, and I love it here.
It makes some sense because you're talking about fashion, food, tech, so these are industries that have more daily iterative interactions with consumers. So coming from humanities and thinking about messaging and communications, I can see where there's a tie-in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely sit a little bit more in that creative side of sustainability. Yeah. So I'm not one of the clever folks who can do all the kind of carbon footprinting and all the nitty-gritty scientific stuff. I work with brilliant people who do that, but I sit much more on, I guess, how do you bring people in? How do you, use the power of messaging, of storytelling, of narrative, of culture, to create, I guess, the conditions within which some of these industries can start to move.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. And you and I were talking a little bit about the theme of some of our recent shows around storytelling and this whole focus on creativity being human and being important to getting people to think about new ways of doing things, because we kind of get stuck in going to buy the product that we buy or driving the car that we drive because it's what we've always done. So I think the creativity storytelling's, it's going to be important to get people to move at a global level.
Totally. You're thinking about culture is one of the most important, it defines our behaviors, the way that we see the world. I did a really fascinating piece of work a few years back with BAFTA.
The awards.
And the film and TV industry, looking at how can storytellers who reach billions of people through programming, through TV and film programming, how can they use the power of storytelling to kind of articulate the climate story?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I was listening, what I always talk about, the Prof G pod with Scott Galloway. I just listen to it most days I drive to work. And he was doing this interesting piece recently on how we as humans that are suffering with lots of anxieties at work, at home, whether it's financial pressure or whatever it might be, we escape to Netflix. And actually we're all, or whatever our streaming service of choice is, but we're escaping to these digital environments of content. And when you think about the amount of people, particularly in the communities that we live in, that are in those spaces, it is a huge platform to start educating and informing and influencing. And I hadn't thought about it in that way, from a sustainability standpoint.
Yeah, massive, like very, very powerful lever for sure.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me on to a question around teams. How are you seeing teams, particularly in this sustainability sphere, come together? There's consultancies. You talked about sustainability consultancies. I would imagine there's advertising agencies, economists, engineers. Like, you're bringing people from all sorts of functions together. Where have been some good examples of where you've seen some lift from these teams, and how have they come about?
I think that's a really good question, because oftentimes I would say a sustainability team within a business is tiny in comparison to its other teams. So, I'm sure, if you compare a sustainability team to a marketing team, the bench on the marketing team is going to massively outweigh the sustainability team. Yeah. So I think a lot of time, particularly in house roles, let's say, in sustainability roles, a lot of the time, I think the job for those teams is to enable everyone outside their kind of sustainability team. So I think that when you're thinking about teamwork, it's not working in tiny siloed teams. It's actually, how do you take this knowledge and the action plans, and how do you get the whole business working on it? I had an amazing conversation today with a woman who she's a little bit more in the commercial team, but very much from a sustainability point of view. And she was telling me about all these programs that they have going on. I was like, oh my gosh, your to-do list, that's massive. How big's your team? She was like, we're 5 people. And I was like, how are you doing it? And she said, we've got to work with everyone else. So I think, collaboration for sure, particularly in business, is just massive. It's a massive part of the job. And then, yes, as you say, there's traditional, I guess, sustainability consultancies, and then creative agencies now, I guess I've seen over the last 10 years, move much more into this space. Because, as you outlined, it's a communications challenge as well. Yeah. And when we have brilliant creatives who, who can set social norms, they can cut through, they know how to shape desire and behavior. They have a massive creatives have a massive role to play. Traditionally, creative agencies have kind of peddled consumerism and that selling more stuff, and now I think hopefully there's some great stuff going on in the creative industries where they're starting to recognize their own impact.
That's neat. I guess the industries come under a little bit of fire, particularly the more traditional, larger businesses that are having economic impact, heavy carbon footprints, coming under fire for greenwashing, because they're only doing the creative work. Oh yeah, we're offsetting, or we believe strongly in reducing our paper usage, or whatever some of those simple messages are, but they're not really changing the story. How do you find the best companies are tackling that in the creative sphere? So it's not just lip service. So they're actually going in and driving some of those changes, so that there is real science, there are real metrics behind, the new path forwards.
Yeah, you're right. Greenwashing is just a massive, massive problem right now. I think sometimes greenwashing is done accidentally, and sometimes it can be done it can be used as a real deceptive tool. So using communications to kind of gloss over and hide very, very poor behaviour and a bad reputation. So I think to guard against that, I don't know. I think my take on that is if you are using the power of creativity in service of getting some of this stuff done and these transitions made, rather than just talking about how great you are, that is a very good place to start.
I really like that. I'm going to write that down. So power of creativity to get stuff done.
Yeah.
I've seen get stuff done, GSD, as an acronym where the S is replaced with another word, but
I did stop myself from doing that, from saying that.
I'd never heard that acronym before, and now it's coming up all the time. Maybe people are starting to get fed up and really leaning into that bias for action too.
Yeah.
That's
sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more then about the now work. So you founded this new business. What was it that brought you to say we need to create better access, better connectivity for these sustainability professionals to connect on projects? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm trying to think where to start with this. I don't tell you a really long-winded story, but I guess what I was noticing was that more folks were moving into independent work.
Yeah.
So I was one of those great resignation statistics a year ago. And I was like, I'm going to take some time off and try and figure out, which I know is like a completely privileged thing to do, like take some time out of work and like try and go and figure out what you want to do next. But I did that not for too long. I then went freelance and started to kind of work more independently. And then I met many of the freelancers working in this space. And I noticed that the way that I was able to access projects was through my personal networks, which is great if you have those networks. But if you don't, I was like, that feels a little bit...
That's another privilege problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm getting work because I've managed, I've managed to get, find my way into this space, which I love. Like I love working in this space.
Yeah.
But then was finding that I was just getting work through personal networks. And then I thought back off into the way that I used when I was working in kind of consultancy. Often when you're servicing your own projects, you're like, I need a person to support on this, or I need these type of people, and you're picking up the phone to those that you know. And then I was like, it's such a short-sighted way to like connect people to work.
Yeah.
So I was seeing like vast amounts of people like wanting to move into more independent work, organizations that need those skills and those brains and those perspectives. So really what we're setting out to do is kind of take out the friction of people finding.
Nice. With
the,
that really
the
niche focus on sustainability professionals. And is it more in the creative sphere of sustainability where you've been, or are you looking across the wider skill sets?
Yeah, we're as a lot of very wide skill set. So we have very like what I would say like technical folks. So those who can, experts in like deep subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Some people who can get into the nitty gritty of life cycle assessments, materiality, looking at the carbon footprints and like digging the numbers, net zero road mapping. That I would say in the middle we have a lot more systems thinkers, so kind of a lot kind of broader sets of knowledge, can connect the dots across multiple issues. And then more creative folks, so storytellers, creatives, copywriters, art directors, filmmakers who only want to work in this space. So pretty,
great.
Broad skill set, but niche in sustainability. Yeah,
so that's really neat. Just bouncing back to that privilege piece. Privilege can be a triggering word for a lot of people. A lot of people feel guilty or ashamed that they have the privilege, but I like to turn it on its head sometimes and say, how can we make that privilege more available to others? And it sounds like that's what you're doing with the work now. You're starting to say, well, if you don't have the network already, we can plug you in. If you
Yeah.
don't have the time to think about how you might start your own freelancer business, well, we can give you some early ideas,
Yeah.
access, while you're still doing your day job before you make the jump. So it
Yeah.
sounds like you are actually leveraging it and making it more accessible.
Yeah, that's ultimately what we would, it's one of our things, like increasing access to this type of work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studies been done on by brilliant organizations like Diversity in Sustainability, looking at the state of diversity in this space. And
Yeah.
it's very white, it's very middle class. People tend to have studied to a certain level. And that's... It is a problem because actually we'd need like divergent thinking
Yeah.
to solve some of these like wicked challenges, and you don't get that if the group is homogenous. Now that is changing for sure, so much more young, so there's demographic shifts in younger folks coming into this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an issue, but yeah, access is the thing that we want to kind of support.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. I love the work that you're doing to create that. And it's a part of some of the projects that we've been working on. Sometimes it's not, can you stop work, or can you, it's just, can you find 3 or 4 hours a week where you could bounce some ideas around with some other people? You can start in a pretty small way too.
Totally. Yeah.
What was it?
Sure.
What was it that attracted you, Laura, to the idea of being independent and being a freelancer? Because you touched on the fact that you're seeing more and more people choose to become independent and freelancers. Was it anything in particular?
Yeah, I think for me, for me personally, it was a little bit more like trying to find a way to work that also worked with life.
Yeah.
So having a little bit more control and flexibility was like really important to me.
Yeah.
And then taking on projects that I was like really fired up about.
I like
on the
that.
issues that, so I think that that's what it in its best form, like independent work can enable you to do that. Yeah.
I like that. There's a business that I followed years ago. A good friend of mine, Jason Falchuk, was running it, and they were helping with bringing new drugs to market up in Boston in that sort of biotech pharma market. And where they found that they were bringing freelancers to play is that people that didn't want to get caught up in the politics and the administration bureaucracy of managing large teams. They just wanted to be doing the work they were passionate about, whether it was a therapeutic that really caught their eye because a family member had suffered from an illness, or whether they just really loved the hardcore technical work of this stage of a project and didn't want to have to follow the whole project through its cycle. So projects that you're fired up about, that's a good way for a lot of people to be thinking about where they're taking the team that they're going to choose to be a part of and their time that they can be putting into work.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's like, before we launched the business, obviously we did lots of user research, spoke to many different people who were kind of either currently freelance, thinking about it, and tried to get to like, what are some of the motivators? And for a lot of people, it is around that. It's around actually having more control in the work that you are doing.
Yeah.
And being able to, as you say, plug in and play in the areas that you are like uniquely placed to, and where your strengths are, where your passion is, where your skills are. So I think it can definitely offer that.
And I also imagine that historically, like I've been in this contingent workforce, contract workforce space for 20 something years. And historically, the argument was it's always people that have already got the experience and they're just plugging in to help a company, because there's not a lot of career development or growth that comes with it. But I don't think that's true anymore. I'm sensing that you even said it, younger people are going freelance earlier in their careers. It feels like maybe choosing those projects that you're fired up about, teams that you want to be a part of and learn from. It's a bit more like pick your own adventure as far as how you're going to grow your career.
Totally. Yeah, I think that is so true. And like the days of having a job for life, I think of,
Yeah.
oh, what a
Long
gone.
gone.
And yeah, and I kind of I feel that's a little bit sad in some ways, but yeah, they're not here anymore, and people are looking, the portfolio career, actually thinking about how do I build a career out of all of these many different projects that I do.
Yeah.
And I think I was reading, I think it was a study in Harvard Business School, looking at the rise and kind of doing a landscape review of the kind of flexible talent platforms that are out there right now for knowledge-based workers.
Yeah.
And, it's like by 2027, like half of the US labor market is going to be freelance.
It's wild.
Say.
Yeah.
So it's just like this, a complete reconfiguration of the role that work plays in our lives, I guess, is what's happening here at a meta level.
Yeah, which is cool. And it means that you can have, which it should be, and thinking about sustainability, thinking about the sharing economy, the circular economy, whatever framework you want to consider. If you've got a brilliant person, why lock them up in one job and one company? Because you said at the very beginning, how do we drive massive scale transformation? Well, we need to take the best thinkers and the best storytellers, and we need to kind of help spread them around between more projects. There isn't just going to be one winning project. There's going to be thousands of projects that interconnect to make that change.
Totally. And I think that interconnection thing is really interesting, because with that, you get like a cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah.
And again, going back to that massive scale transformation that we need, that's a very, very useful thing, if you can have cross-pollination of ideas, because you get to more surprising, interesting, radical ideas, I guess.
Yeah. Embrace the radical. I like that.
Yeah.
When you think about these freelancers coming on platform, particularly your platform, the Now Work, are they having to come on full time, or can it be a side hustle while they have a day job? Like, how are you seeing that take shape?
That's a good question. So I think most of the folks that we've got are what I would call kind of career or full-time freelance. But actually what we also have is people who are maybe working part-time, so 4 days a week, and with their other day, they're looking to do something with that, to explore projects outside of their kind of 4-day week. So I would say on the most part, we're getting more folks who have made the decision to do this full time, and a smaller proportion who are kind of looking at supplementing existing work with projects.
That's neat. And when you think about full-time in your platform, is that full-time with one client and project, or are they full-time fractional? They're on 3 projects concurrently.
Full-time fractional.
Full-time fractional. Cool. I think the future is fractional. I think going back to that point about cross-pollination, it's going to be more exciting. People pick their hot projects. And let's be honest, certain projects, certain companies can't move so fast as to warrant having that person full-time. So just having them 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 hours a week in the early phases means that they actually get their project out of the ground, and then they can bring on the other disciplines.
Totally. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the woman who I mentioned who's got a tiny team. Like, you don't have a deep bench, and yet the science, the context around sustainability is shifting all the time. So you can never build, I don't think, maybe you can, a full time, to cover every single issue that you might need to cover.
Yeah.
I think that's where that fractional, piece comes in, that you can tap into expertise when you need it.
But that's an interesting point, particularly for our listeners out there that are running large talent acquisition organizations, or they're a chief people officer, or even they're running their own business, is that, as you think about teams and you think about that vastly changing landscape of what's happening with science, with customer preferences, with technology, maybe you can't build that team that's going to last 10 years or 20 years anymore, and you need to bring in more of that fractional bench
Yeah.
even into industries that traditionally have been a little bit more static and steady.
Yeah. 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 Potentially. Yeah.
It's interesting. My father was a mining engineer, so he worked for a large mining company. My uncle was a software developer who built a software product, and they would always have interesting conversations around the dinner table. And my dad would be like, "Well, it's easy. You build the job description, you look at what they need to do, and you go and find that person, you hire them, and you're good." And my uncle with the software business was like, "Well, it's not that easy because I need these tasks done this week or this month or this year. And next year I'm going to have a totally different set of tasks to tackle. So
Yeah.
I can't find a person who can do this year's work and next year's work."
Yeah. Totally. It's all unknown, isn't it? The
Yeah.
future. And yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Which I think is fun for the teams as well, because we had Nick Smoot on the podcast that we've just published, and he made a great point about how somehow, whether it's through technology or whether it's through task specialization and that you and I were talking about it before, Laura, on how a lot of management thinking's derived out of the Industrial Revolution and manufacturing environments. Once you get so task oriented, you take the fun out of work anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it may also be creating a more fun environment for people to be working in if they're bouncing off some different people and some different skill sets, experiences, divergent thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100. I really agree with that. And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And I think, like a big thing for me and kind of starting the Now work was really about how can we enable brilliant humans to, how do we create the conditions for brilliant humans
I
to
like that.
do like world-changing work.
Yeah, I saw that on your website, world-changing people, world-changing work. I like that connection.
Yeah.
And it takes brilliant humans. That's cool.
It does.
Where do you see technology playing in that? Obviously, you're a technology platform that helps connect these people. Is the technology only a part of the connection, or are you using technology in other ways within the work that's being done?
It's definitely more of an enabler for us than it's very, very, I would say we're super high touch in terms of the work that we're doing, because sustainability is it's very nuanced. So you can't really do that thing, of like separating tasks and having a very clear thing and you can't really systematize it as much as that.
Interesting.
So for us, we use the tech that we use as an enabler to enable us to kind of work a little bit more seamlessly, but ultimately we're very, very human, very high touch in terms of what we do, because when a challenge or brief comes into us from a client, a lot of the time what we're doing is helping craft that brief more.
Interesting.
So we're not just kind of getting a brief, throwing it into an algorithm and then spitting out, and here's some people who can do it. It's really not what we're doing. Like what we're doing is like consulting a little bit on the briefs that come in. So actually helping our clients figure out what's the challenge that they really want to solve, what's the best use of the budget that they've got, and what's the best approach to kind of to tip over that challenge, I guess. And then once we've crafted that, we then can start to identify the talent or teams that we'll build to solve that challenge. For us, as I say, technology is definitely an enabler versus any kind of like decision maker for us.
Which is, it's really important. I like that framework that you just laid out. What's the challenge? What's the budget we've got to tackle a challenge? How does our approach then inform the team that we pull together? Because one of the biggest things that's broken in my mind right now for teams around the world is we're still operating off these 40-hour-a-week job descriptions that were set and have been dusty on its shelf for years. And so when we say, oh, we've got a sustainability project, we need a creative, well, let's go and get a copywriter job description and hire for that. And you're not really thinking about why are we bringing the person in? What type of experience should they have in the past? Who might they have worked with, and who might they be connected with? So it's a little bit static. So I like the fact that I love that word craft. You're crafting the brief and really putting the human elements into how we're going to build the team and what kind of work are they going to do.
Yeah, totally. And then it allows us to like also, you know, we like to say we see the full person, because CVs are like useful in some ways, but also not that useful, just entries on a CV. Like you get much more, there's so much more nuance to a person than like their last job title. So we really what we want to do is like see the full human being. So look at like what brings you joy in work. So some of the questions that we ask when people are kind of onboarding with us is what's like a dream impact brief for you? What would you love to work on? Is there anyone you absolutely would never want to work with? What's brought you joy?
Yeah.
Like when's the last time you lost track of when you were doing something, lost track of time when you were doing something related to work? So then we can get a little bit more to what do people love when it comes to work? And we think that makes for more impactful work.
Yeah, it does. And I wonder, I don't know if you asked the question, do you ask people who do they like to work with? Who have they worked successfully with before? Are you trying to bring teams from other projects through your approach?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're always careful in that we don't, like, again, that cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah.
And I think often with freelance, what can happen is you get very good at doing something. Like I'm, you know, for example, someone on our platform is a brilliant kind of strategist.
Yeah.
But that's what they do, and they get paid for it. And a freelancer, you kind of, because you're, you know, you're selling your service essentially. Yeah. You perfect it, but then sometimes it doesn't let you get out of that.
So people can get stuck.
Yeah, and I think can be a downside of this type of work.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you enable, you know, if you're in an organization, you might have a little bit more bandwidth, depending on the type of organization, I guess.
Yeah.
But a little bit more bandwidth to go, I actually want to do a secondment in that team and figure out what they're doing. I want to do a little bit more work with it. And there's a little, you know, that you have a bit of freedom to do that. Whereas I think freelance, you can go get in a lane and you can stay in it. So we're like trying to understand from our talent, like, what do you want to be doing as well? Like if there's an industry you haven't worked in yet, but would love to, tell us why.
Yeah. That's cool.
You know, we like trust people, because, you know, if someone's like, I'm fascinated by this, I don't have huge amounts of it, I've not really worked in that industry, but I'm fascinated by it, they can bring other experience to bear.
Yeah.
Rather than just being like, I do fashion and sustainability and that's it.
And the other thing is, and we're seeing this in all teams, is that if you're responding to what someone's passionate about, they're going to show up in a whole different way at work.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just saying, hey, I think it would be a good idea for you to go and work in this industry, and they turn up saying, well, Laura told me it was a good idea, but I actually don't like fashion, or I don't like this.
Yeah.
Then that's not going to be good either. So they're kind of pointing where they want to go, and you're just kind of laying down the tracks for them to get there.
Yeah.
That's cool. Are you doing anything, or do you envisage in the future doing something around that forward orientation of, well, maybe you need to do some training, or maybe we can capture that you did this type of work in your profile now, so you get picked up for it in the future? Are you starting to be part of that job crafting, resume building process for these individual freelancers?
So in some ways, I wouldn't say we are there yet at all. A little bit baby steps for us as we're such a new business. But what one thing that we are doing is something called skill shares. Okay. So it's essentially training, but from the community.
Oh, that's cool.
So if we had a brilliant one the other week by a sustainability strategist called Richard Johnson,
Uh-huh.
author of a brilliant book called Mission Lit, looking at how purposeful businesses are kind of eating their profit blinkered competitors for lunch, essentially.
Yeah.
And he kind of talked us through the theory and his tools and practices. And then, so we're trying to like facilitate training in that way.
Nice.
But yeah, in terms of like crafting resumes and thinking through, I mean, we'll always have a conversation about development with our talent for sure. And thinking through like where are areas of interest and how might you be able to get there. So we kind of do it on a very like one-to-one level, and then sometimes with the group community-based training,
Nice.
it allows people just go, oh, I didn't even know I was interested in that, and now I am. And
I think that's really powerful, because that's what a lot of these other platforms haven't done, or even just small organizations that are managing freelancers. They haven't really created that community and that learning opportunity from within the community. But that's big. And I would imagine it ties into what you shared earlier on being able to connect into your next job. Because if you're on a training Skillshare there with Richard, and you saw someone else in the platform and you said, hey, we live local, let's have a coffee, or let's do a Zoom meeting, you just start to build on that connectivity too.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's neat. So there's been some really good themes here. I love the kind of, you can never build the entire team. So with sustainability, you need to be able to flex outside resources and bring the right people in for the right tasks. I really like that whole power of creativity to get stuff done. As you start thinking about those couple of themes, where are you hoping to see more impact? Where are you starting maybe even to see more impact? Are there particular industries where you think sustainability professionals are being brought in to really make that change?
That's a good question. Maybe I have a recency bias because I've just been doing some reading on fashion, but I've done a lot of work in the fashion industry throughout my career. And, we were talking just before about how we need to see these like massive scale transformations. And it's an industry like fashion is both a creative and cultural powerhouse. But the business model has traditionally and historically been built on extraction of value. So extracting huge amounts of natural resources, designing products in a way that wastes these resources, and then doing that by paying people, particularly
poorly.
Women, very, very poorly, to the point where they're not able to live well. So I think as an industry, it represents like this tension, I guess, of, huge opportunity to use its creativity and cultural power for good. But we can't underestimate the fact that its business model has historically been based on these very value extracting practices. But I'm seeing a lot of work going on in the fashion industry, which brings me great hope that things are kind of starting to move and change, or at least there's a recognition of the power that it has to do so. And I think a lot of work is happening in the creative industries, so particularly around creative agencies actually reckoning with their own power. So brilliant organizations like Purpose Disruptors and Clean Creatives. Clean Creatives are a kind of an organization based in the US but have a footprint in Europe as well. Actually calling out the creative agencies that are working with fossil fuel clients.
Wow.
And saying, hey, you can't be talking about your office cup recycling when you are servicing.
That's the greenwashing.
So I think there's great conversations going on in that industry as well.
Interesting.
In terms of actually, reckoning with its power.
In that fashion space, I mean, everyone naturally goes to Patagonia as like a sustainable fashion brand, but not all fashion brands are going to become Patagonia because it doesn't align with, what their consumers like them for. What are some of the emerging focuses for fashion businesses that are thinking sustainability? Is it as simple as fair wages, or is it thinking differently about materials and the procurement and recycle of materials in their process? Where do you see teams doing great work, at a more granular level in fashion?
Yeah, so materials is like a good place to start for sure. But it's not, it doesn't really get to the root of some of the issues.
Right.
So living wage is a very difficult issue.
Yeah.
So when you said just paying fair wages, I wish it was as easy as
But
that.
it's not.
No. I think where the conversations are going in fashion, which is fascinating, is towards degrowth. So looking at how do you so actually how do you, again, the model is built on sell, more production. So you can replace the production, I guess, with better materials, but you're unfortunately not tackling that business model.
Yeah.
So I think
so no more fast fashion, which is all about just selling more products year on year, selling
Yeah.
more SKUs. It's more
Yeah.
high quality, scarcity, but bringing a product that's that's going to carry a good margin and allow the living wages and good use of materials.
Yeah, and essentially it's tapping in, like, can we, you're essentially getting into some very big not issues, but ideas here around consume and consumption. Like, how do we, how do we relieve ourselves of that desire to consume endlessly?
That's an interesting one. I think about my kids when we go to Target, and they always want the next shiny plastic cheap toy that's going to be in the trash can in 3 months, or and maybe there's other ways to tackle that desire, even though that's not in fashion. It's a consumer problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and but these businesses have often, it's not. I'm sure your kids just didn't wake up and they couldn't,
they've been
medical
smart in
consumers.
their advertising and product placement and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, like, degrowth is a really interesting area, which is starting to, I mean, obviously it's a theory that's been around for many, many years.
Yeah.
But now is starting to kind of get some resonance in industry, which I think is fascinating.
That is fascinating. So, given my origins in industry, it would be remiss of me not to dig into the fossil fuels. You just touched on some of the agencies that are being called out for working with the fossil fuel providers. But, as you see teams come together and work in the fringes, which is where the creativity, the radical ideas, the innovation really comes from. What would your hopes be for the now work in bringing sustainability professionals to bear in meaningful projects in, whether it's fossil fuels or other large extractive industries?
So my dad was also a coal miner.
Yeah.
I should have said that. Yeah. Well, I know your dad was an engineer.
He worked in coal too.
Yeah. So I'm from a kind of former mining village in the north of England.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one. I think a lot, I've got to be real. I think unless Ørsted, I guess, are a different example of a transition that, a company that's transitioned into renewables.
Uh-huh.
But I think what history has told us is that many of these companies are not great actors. They're not good actors.
Yeah.
And they have plans to continue extraction at rates that are unsustainable and are having us shoot towards 3 degrees of warming.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think that
there's no silver bullet out there.
There isn't, no. Although I guess in terms of extractive industry, so let's take fashion. And my hope is really, like, coming back to your question on work, and what my hope is for the people in the teams that we put together, is that this work is like really hard, because it's really hard, it's really challenging, and it's hard on 2 points. It's hard practically because you're essentially trying to redesign a system from within.
Yeah.
And that system is set up for you not to redesign it.
Yeah.
So practically, it's like really challenging to do that. And it's very emotionally taxing at times, because once you engage with the subject matter, the literature, the expertise,
it's scary.
You understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you can't unsee that. You can't unknow that. You can't forget that. So you're up and this is having an impact on people and lives and culture and our ways of life and nature right now. Like, this isn't happening 30 years away. It's now.
Yeah.
So that makes it very difficult work. And it can often lead to burnout for many, because, you're like, oh, I can't stop because I'm exhausted, but I need to keep going because I need to do it, and I believe in it, and I want to make a difference. On the other hand, I don't want to like give sustainability work a bad rap.
Yeah.
It is the best possible work you can do, because at the same time, it is the most creative, innovative, intellectually stimulating work out there, in my opinion. So my hope is that, what we're trying to do is like navigate. There's a tension there between it being very, very hard and amazing. And, how did we enable people to exist within that tension?
Yeah.
With more ease.
I like that.
So that's what we're trying to play a small part in doing.
Yeah, that's really neat. And that reminds me of like Pink's work on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Like, you're bringing these people together, these freelancers, to work on these really purposeful projects, to master their skills, and to have some autonomy in terms of who they choose to work with on what particular projects. That as much as there's tension there, it's extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's neat. I mean, there's so many other questions I'd love to ask Laura, but I know we're up on time here. One thing that I just put out there as a soundbite is I loved on your website how you talked about supporting startups too. And when you say things like it's hard to practically redesign from the inside, it does say that the future is going to be the small guys taking on the big guys. Starting from scratch is way easier than redesigning. So I'm sure a lot of startups out there would love to be connecting with you and thinking on how they bring these sustainability principles and talent into their new way of tackling a market, a product, a service. So how might those and other listeners find you and connect with the Now work?
So you can just Google thenowwork.com and find us there. I do on LinkedIn as well. So the Now Work on LinkedIn. Obviously, my name is Laura Hunter. Would love to hear from anyone who's interested in this very exciting adventure of building a better world.
No, that's neat. Well, I'm sure you'll get a lot of interest, and thanks for all of the impactful work that you're doing with this new venture.
Thank you so much.